Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Being an LGBT plus inclusive club webinar. We've got really awesome guests tonight. We've got three special guests, which I'll introduce in a second. Just to explain the format in terms of how the session will work this evening. First of all, we'll have a panel discussion with our special guests, and then we'll have the opportunity then for those listening in to submit their questions for the panel to answer them at the end of the session. So to do that, basically down the bottom, there's a Q&A option. If you click on that and submit your question, then we'll work for those at the end as well. I will remind you as the session goes on to submit some of those questions. So without further ado, we'll introduce our panel tonight. First person is Lou Englefield. Lou is a director of Pride Sports and campaign director of Football versus Homophobia. She's been a leading voice and expert on LGBTQ plus inclusion in sport for over a decade now, and has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the sector. Our second guest tonight is Sinead O'Rourke from Deeside Dragons Girls Football Club. Sinead, along with the club, were recently organised for their hard work and achievements in creating LGBTQ plus inclusive playing environments in the grassroots game in the Football versus Homophobia Awards. So great to have some recognition for the hard work there indeed. And our last but not least guest is Dr. Sophie Cook, who is a British author, broadcaster, photographer, politician, and vice president of Bellevue Football Club. While working as a photographer at AFC Bournemouth in 2015, Sophie became the first transgender person to work in the Premier League football. She was recently recognised for her campaigning on behalf of the LGBT community by the British LGBT Awards with the Outstanding Contribution to LGBT Plus Life Award. So super guests we've got tonight, and welcome everyone. So moving on to our first question as part of our panel discussion. So I'm just going to open up to Lou just to talk a little bit about the Football versus Homophobia campaign, which during the month of February, during this month, has been a month of action for the organisation. So Lou, over to you.
Thanks, Jason. So Football versus Homophobia is, and in Wales, FvH Cymru, is a campaign that works year-round to tackle LGBTIQ plus inclusion in football. So we are mainly an education campaign. So we deliver lots of workshops and education programs at all levels of footballs, from grassroots up into kind of like Premier League clubs. We deliver training for, professionals, for scholars in professional academies. We also deliver workshops for, year 5 and 6 pupils in primary schools. So we deliver a whole load of kind of education work. We also work internationally as well, and we have a campaign month in February. We work again in February. We work with professional clubs, but we also work with grassroots clubs, and our FvH grassroots campaign is currently live when we're not locked down. The idea is that clubs designate a game during February to the campaign, and they also pledge to take one piece of action on LGBTIQ plus inclusion. We send everybody out campaign packs and give them lots of suggestions of things that they could do to make their club more inclusive. And then along with our, as a bit of a kind of incentive, we've got a partnership with Puma, and they create a load of really nice rainbow footballs, and we distribute rainbow footballs to clubs who take part, because that gives us a bit of a kind of visual thing as well for clubs to get involved. So yes, I've just jumped off a conference, an online conference this afternoon with the Fair Network, who we partner with to work internationally. There were over 200 people, listening into that conference, and some really, really amazing conversations being had there. So yeah, that's kind of who we are.
Cheers, Lou. And there was some superb work that you and the campaign's been doing for many years now. And it's great to see lots of Welsh clubs signing up as well this year, and along with that continue to grow as well. So suppose to start us off then, in your experiences, how inclusive is football to the LGBTQ plus community? So Sophie, I don't know whether you want to start us off with talking about some of your experiences, particularly in 2015.
I think that for me, when I transitioned back in 2015, that no one had ever transitioned within professional football before. So I didn't have any kind of track record, any kind of case histories to tell me whether it would be a positive or a negative experience. And I think it was the fear of the unknown that actually caused most anxiety. I mean, when I transitioned, I had friends that honestly didn't want me to go back to football after my transition. They said, you're going to be verbally abused, you're going to be in physical danger. And the thing is, okay, yeah, there was some abuse, there was some negativity, but no more so than I would have experienced on the streets. And I've always believed that any kind of discrimination that we see within football, it's not football's problem, it's society's problem, because if there's bigotry and discrimination on the streets, it will be reflected in football, because football reflects the society that we're part of. But after that initial fear, what I actually discovered was that there were so many people within the game who had a real passion and hunger for trying to rectify possibly the past mistakes that had happened within football. Because let's face it, football has had a bad reputation with regards to homophobia, racism, various kinds of discrimination, but there's so much great work going on now. And from that initial fear, I spent a couple of seasons working with Bournemouth in the Premier League. I got invited to be an ambassador for Kick It Out. I got invited out to Moscow to speak to LGBT activists during the World Cup there. And I must admit, when I was out there, and I remember being at the World Cup semi-final and with my trans pride flag, and thinking, how the hell did a trans woman get to be stood at the World Cup semi-final? And it was purely because of the people that are doing so much within the game to try and make it more inclusive. And I've always believed that football has a unique position within society to act as a driver of social change. Football starts conversations. I go into schools, and if I walked into a school and said, I'm here to talk about equality and diversity, you'd see the kids glazing over and turning off. But because I walk in and start talking about football and equality and diversity, they actually pay attention. And I think that football has got this unique position within our society to make positive social change. And the great thing is that it's actually doing a good job of that at the moment.
And Sinead, you are at quite a progressive club at the moment, doing some great work. With some of the things that you introduced in recent times, how was that received initially, and how has the response been with while you're playing other clubs and throughout the general projects that you've been running as well? You're just on mute, Sinead, just to let you know.
On the whole, the general response has been really good from all our volunteers, coaches, to the whole community. Last year, for a little mini fun tournament to get other clubs involved, and the response for that was overwhelmingly good. We had lots of clubs wanting to contact us to take part. The initiatives that we've been putting into place, everyone has responded quite well. It's only been a couple of people I can say that have questioned why we're doing it, or have not completely understood why. We've taken the decision to be completely visible in the fact that we're an inclusive club. And I think we've got questions like, I think probably the thing that threw me the most was when someone said, we don't have any gay players in this club. But how would we know until we become fully inclusive and make it a welcoming and nurturing environment for everyone? And it wasn't until we did that actually it became transparent that we did. And so it was important that we took them steps. And then we felt it was important to put all our volunteers on education to do with, we did anti-bullying and we've done inclusion education, and all our volunteers took that on. And I think since we've done that from education, that the understanding of why it's important has got through to everyone, and now we've got the whole club on board, and it's just removing another barrier so that we're all on the same page. And I think understand, because I think people understand, or they think they're welcoming. I think as a club we thought we were welcoming just naturally, and we thought that everyone in our community, we assumed, knew that. And then obviously once we took away them assumptions and start putting something into place where players and people of our community can understand, that knew for sure that we were a club that was for everyone, I think that was a really good starting stone for us. And it was taking part in the Football Versus Homophobia Month of Action is where that education really began for us as a club.
Yeah, and I think it's some really valuable learning points there, Sinead, that you've shared for anyone who is part of clubs listening in, is that, you know, sometimes it's going that extra step by visibly being a supportive club to the LGBT community and getting involved with campaigns like Football Versus Homophobia, so that people can visibly see that you are a welcoming club, and either it'll encourage those to be themselves and be their true authentic selves who are part of the club, that maybe you weren't aware that you have people from the community in the first place, or encourage those from the community to be a part of your club and choose your club to join as well. Louise, you work with clubs, as you mentioned, not just within Wales, but across, but all over the world, really. What's your kind of thoughts on in terms of, you know, where football is at with being inclusive to the LGBT community?
I think that I think it's can be a really mixed picture. I think that's the thing. I think what Sinead just said is like the absolute best thing I've heard somebody say for ages, which is we totally assumed that we were welcoming to everybody, and then we decided to do something about it. And then when we started doing something about it, we realized that maybe we hadn't been what we thought we'd been. And I think that that is absolutely, you know, spot on. We, you know, there are campaigns like Football Versus Homophobia. We have a month of action in February. There's Rainbow Laces in, you know, there's Rainbow Laces in November, December. And I think, you know, those campaigns are really important because they're visible. And one of the things about LGBTIQ+ people is that we're largely an invisible minority. So visibility is a really big important thing for us. So and you know, coming off the conference I've just been on, you know, every single person on the conference, from journalists to grassroots players to professional footballers, we're all talking about the need to be out there and to be visible, so that we can be role models, so that we can show that there are LGBTIQ+ people in the game. But I think that we need to go beneath that. We need to work beyond that. And I think, you know, Sinead's given a couple of really good examples for grassroots football. You know, we know that a lot of name calling in football is based around gender stereotyping, and that can, you know, particularly affect young LGBTIQ+ young people. So young lesbians, gay men, for example, who don't present in a kind of gender normative way, young trans people who are discovering more about their gender identity and trans status. So, you know, looking at bullying, safeguarding, those issues within your club are really, really important first steps to take, to make sure, you know, have you got, for example, you know, a code of conduct for players? Do players know what's expected of them? Do coaches know how to challenge homophobic or transphobic language? You know, at the beginning of the season, do you set out your stall and tell the parents, for example, if you're a junior club, or, you know, if you're an adult club, do you tell your players what is expected of them in terms of their behaviour and some of those issues? So, you know, football is a million miles away from where it was when I first started working in the game, sort of 15 years ago. But I think we just need to be a little bit careful that we don't just do the visibility part of stuff, and that we dig underneath that, and we start on the journey that Sinead has clearly started on with her club.
Brilliant, fantastic points there. I just remember everyone listening that you can submit questions for later using the Q&A function down below. So next question, guys. So what are some of the challenges faced then by the LGBT community within football? So Sophie, I know you've spoken earlier about the time where obviously when you was at Bournemouth. What were some of the challenges, and I suppose how did the club, particularly the manager at the time, help you with that time?
I mean, I think one of the things that that the club struggled with is that they didn't. I think that I was pretty much the first trans person that any of them had ever met, and I mean, in the Premier League, you've got various Premier League standards of around equality and diversity that clubs have to meet, but until people have actually come face to face with people and actually sort of have some real life experience of working with people, it's abstract concepts. It's like books telling them to use this language. It's telling them to recognize certain things about people's identities, but until they actually do it for real, it's like I say, it's an abstract concept. And one of the most heartwarming things that happened to me when I transitioned was, I mean, when right at the very first meeting at the club, when it turned out that I still had a job, our then manager, Eddie Howe, turned around to me and said, "What can I do to make this easier for you?" And the thing is, not everyone's going to understand straight away, but for your boss to turn around, and let's face it, the gaffer of the first team to turn around and say that to you, it's like, you know that he understands what's going on, and it's all that you can hope for. And I think that that's one of the things that people forget. It's not about knowing the right thing to do all the time. It's about sort of asking people how they want to be treated. It's about asking people what their pronouns are. It's about being open and having those honest discussions. And I think that one of the problems that clubs have in terms of appearing to be inclusive is the fact that so much of their language, so much of the media, so much of the day-to-day stuff around football clubs doesn't include LGBT people. And the thing is, for us to feel part of it, we need to see ourselves reflected in our clubs. And I think it's great to see that so many professional football clubs now have got LGBT supporters groups, so many more than had even just a couple of years ago. And so I think it's important that we include that messaging. I mean, any kind of visible campaign like the FvH Month of Action or Rainbow Laces, all these things help to put it out there that, you know what, you are included. And the problem is that obviously you also get the people that sort of jump on it and say, well, someone's sexuality doesn't matter in football. Why is football trying to ram this down our throats? But unless you're on the receiving end of that prejudice and being locked out, you don't understand what it's like to look at it and not see yourself reflected within the game.
Yeah, some really good points there, Sophie. Thank you. And I think the key thing is about not judging somebody. and looking at the human being behind the label. I think that's the key thing, which is essentially what you're saying. And for some people listening here, they might not have had the opportunity to meet somebody or speak to somebody who is trans or even from the LGBT community. But it's, as you rightly said, it's about being open and being confident to ask questions, to get to know somebody, and not to let any stereotypes affect their judgment or their treatment of that individual. But football can be that barrier, that tool that can break down those stereotypes and those areas where people do have something in common and can talk about, and can be that point of interaction at the very first stage, certainly. Louise, what about yourself in terms of some of the challenges and some of the experiences that you've had or stories around the community and football?
Well, first of all, I've got to say, you've got to stop calling me Louise, Jason, because I don't know why I've come up as Louise Englefield on here, but you sound like my mum. So it's like my Sunday name, Louise. So I'm a bit freaked out. I should go in and change it. But anyway, sorry, what was the question?
It was around any experiences or stories that you've sort of had yourself or aware of the challenges within the community itself in football.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I think there are loads of, loads of issues. So, for example, just a couple of things. I was working with a club a couple of years ago, and they told me a story about a child at the club who was basically transitioning, and they were part of the girls team. Sorry, they were quite a young, very 10-year-old, and they were excelling in the girls team, and then they transitioned. And then basically the club said, well, you've got to leave football because you can no longer play here because we haven't got the facilities for you to change in separate from the girls. And basically the club didn't really know, it was a club in England, so didn't really know the FA's trans policy. And in England, the FA's trans policy only comes into play post 18, because up to the age of 18, they license mixed football. So in theory, a young trans person should be able to transition within the game with no problem whatsoever, because mixed football's just totally licensed. So I think that that's an example of the kind of things that can happen because people don't really understand policy, for example. And I thought that was a terrible shame, because, if that young person was a really good footballer, the chances are at 10, they could have transitioned over to the boys team. They were playing at quite a high level, but they could have transitioned really easily, probably over to the boys team, at least got a chance to try out for the team, and be supported in that process. So I've come across a few situations like that where, because people don't really, really don't know what the policy is, they think it's really problematic, or they think, oh, we haven't got changing rooms. And we've got to have gender neutral changing rooms for trans people. Now, it would be ideal for us to have gender neutral changing rooms. I won't lie, it's something that, everybody who's a facility owner should try and have for people at different stages of their transition, or just for people to have some privacy, for cisgender people to have some privacy. Everybody likes a bit of privacy, I think, sometimes. So, so sort of changing facilities, ideally you would have those things. But at grassroots, I know when, I'm knocking on a bit now, but when I played football, when I was younger, women's football, there were no changing rooms. We travel like 30 miles in a car to play a game on a pitch that was like that on the side of a mountain. There were no changing rooms there at all. You'd change in the car, or you'd go in your kit, you'd get absolutely muddy, and then you'd take your boots and socks off and then hope you didn't mess up your mate's, seat with all the mud all over your shorts when you went home. So, I think the thing that Sophie said that was really important was, in her story, is that just how can I help you what do you want? What do you need? You know, having those conversations with people is really important. And of course, you know, then confidentiality is also really important, an important part of that. But I think you know, Sophie's so right. I think people get really freaked out and think, oh, you know, do I know the right thing? Will I do the right thing? You know, just talk to the person in front of you. You know, if they're a new person to your club, that initial welcome is so important, and it's so important for everybody, you know, not just LGBTIQ plus people. That first welcome is the point of inclusion. And if it's somebody who's in your club and they're making a change to their life, presumably you already have a relationship with that person, you know? So yeah, just what Sophie says really around that stuff, listening to people, seeing people for who they are, helping people on their journey, and not getting too worried about having everything in place, but making sure that you absolutely know the basics, you know, for example, around trans participants. You know, there's different issues for LGBT people, but for trans participants, just fundamentally knowing how the rules apply and who they apply to, it can make the difference to somebody's journey, football journey, being uninterrupted, or somebody leaving the game for the whole of their lives, you know.
Yeah, and again, anyone listening in, you know, really important points there from Lou, but anyone listening that does need some support or wanted to talk around those policies or procedures, you know, please reach out and we'll certainly support that. And we want to make sure that every single person in Wales can play football or be involved in the game in whatever capacity that they can. So, you know, certainly please reach out for that. So moving on, in terms of, you know, why is it important then to make football more inclusive for the LGBT community? Sounds like such a straightforward and obvious question, but Sinead, what's your thoughts? And I suppose more so, what are some of the benefits that you've seen as a club by becoming more inclusive to the community as well?
I think it's really important because of the stigmatism around football not being very inclusive. For the LGBT plus community. It makes me think about all the potential players that are out there from the community that haven't entered into football because they're not sure how they'll be welcomed, if they'll be accepted, and how many people at the club or at clubs that they're at cannot be themselves, don't feel like they can be themselves because they're not sure how their club, their teammates, their coach will act. Will they support? Can they still be themselves? And I think it's really important for that to be in place so everyone can feel their authentic self and know that they're going to be, nothing's going to change for them, or they're going to be completely welcomed into it. They're fully accepted, and when they walk through your gates, they don't have that worry. They're entering into a community where it's completely safe for them to be themselves and be supported. And I think inclusion at our club, we understand that we're creating an atmosphere that is inclusive for all our players, but we understand as well that they may not have that outside the club. So we also are doing education on how we support our players. So they might have a bad time at school and they can come to us and we know how to support them. We also do signposting as well. But I think for that individual who's from the community or any community that's a minority, who knows that we're there for them and they can be themselves, I think that makes a massive difference to their lives.
Yeah, definitely, and you know, more than often not, it impacts on their performances as well. You know, if they're players,
Yeah.
you know, if they come in as their full, authentic and self, then you know, no doubt their confidences are going to be a lot higher, and they're going to be enjoying it more, and then their performances are going to be better as well. So in essence, it helps the team also, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think what I've noticed in the last year is that it's our inclusion activities have made our team stronger, their friendships stronger, and it's made them really think about what inclusion is and what it means to them and what it means for their teammate. And I think it's done wonders for our club in that regard.
Can I just come back on that? Because I think that's really fascinating, Sinead, because there's a whole load of research that's been done in the United States to show that inclusive club environments are much more successful. And partly that's because there's greater bonding within the team. So teams feel more like they belong and feel more invested in the team through that inclusive environment. So that's amazing to see that being played out in your club, because there's also this academic research that says the same thing.
Yeah,
Actually,
definitely was.
can I add something to that one as well? Because the thing is, I mean, Stonewall have this phrase that people perform better when they can be themselves. And when you look at professional football, like Premier League football clubs spend millions of pounds trying to get that 0.01% of performance out of a player. And when you think that a player's mental health, their mental well-being can be affected by the fact that they are not able to be open and honest about themselves, that they're having to hide their private life. I mean, you're talking about things that could potentially add so much more to their performance just by them being able to be free and be and bring 100% of themselves to the game, compared with those tiny little 0.01% performance increases that they see through other techniques that they use.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point for any coaches listening on here as well, some of the benefits from the performance side of the game also. So just a reminder, guys, of those listening to submit any questions via the Q&A function. We've had a couple that have come in, so keep putting those questions in. So next question then is around, like, what changes would you like to see made in football in general, or within Wales, to feel more inclusive to everyone, so that people can be themselves and feel that they belong, and what role can football clubs play in those changes? Lou, what do you think on that one?
I think there's just some very basic things that we can start with. So one of the biggest problems that we have in football, particularly in boys and men's football, is the use of homophobic language. And although the world has changed absolutely massively, and we know that young people have like massively different experiences than the generations above. I mean, I've just heard today that a wide-ranging poll in the United States found that 16% of Generation Z, so 16% of like teenagers and young people in their early 20s, identify as something as other than heterosexual. So that's like, you know, the world is really, really changing, and young people are much more like, oh, sexuality is a spectrum, you know, I'm somewhere on it, you know. But what we know is that in the men's game that that homophobic language is still used, although attitudes have changed. And there's some research that's been done around this in rugby in Australia, amongst young men in Australia, where what they found was that they spoke to young men and they said, you know, would you welcome a gay player onto your team? And something like 83% of them said, yeah, of course we would. I haven't got a problem with a gay player. They then said, would you stand up for somebody who was being bullied for being gay? And 81% of them said, yeah, I've got no problem. I feel really confident to do that. Then what they said to the players was, you know, and okay, how many of you have heard homophobic slurs in the last 2 weeks in rugby environments? And almost the same amount of young men had heard homophobic slurs as felt that they would be capable of standing up to anti-gay bullying. So 79% of them had heard anti-gay slurs, and something like 59% of them had used those slurs themselves. And yet they were still, you know, a large majority of them were still saying, oh yeah, no, you know, we'd really welcome a gay man on our team. So we have to think about the way we challenge language, the examples we set as coaches, the way we talk to young people and the way we challenge young people. we have to think about intentional and unintentional homophobia. So, you know, we know that children, we work with children, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, because we know that that's the point at which kids start using anti-gay language slurs in football. So we're not frightened of working with really young children. And we feel that people shouldn't be frightened to challenge really young children. The way you do that's a bit different from how you would challenge like a teenager, somebody who's being intentionally homophobic. So I think if we start with language, that would be a really good thing. I think the other thing is, you know, as Sinead's talked about, you know, safeguarding and bullying policies. I think, you know, stuff around code of conduct. I think, you know, make yourself aware of the FAW trans policy and how that relates to your club, you know, if you're a junior club or if you're an adult club. I think there are just some basic things that my colleague Natalie, who's the head of Football versus Transphobia, has told me around, you know, if you can provide information on your website about the changing facilities you have and what they're like and what you provide, then it means that a trans person can come to your club and find out everything that they need about your club from your website, or maybe even from your Facebook page. You know, there's space to put that on a Facebook page if you haven't got, you know, if you haven't got an actual website. So so yeah, there's kind of lots of changes that we can make. I could go on and on and on about it, to be honest. But that's not because, you know, football in Wales is so homophobic, or, you know, it's just that there's lots for us to do. And really, even talking about these issues is fairly new for a lot of people.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot, you know, the key thing is about being proactive around challenging homophobia and terms. You know, it's not banter, it's not a laugh, it's not a joke. And I think it's important that, irrespective of the intent behind it, that we challenge and continue to do that and use education as that platform and way to try and talk about words, how words have been used historically, the impact the words can have on people. Irrespective of intent. And I think that's something that's important. And as you rightly said, you know, the younger we start these conversations, so that it normalizes talking about the things that we're talking about tonight. You know, Sophie, you mentioned earlier about pronouns, you know, talking about those things. And I think the younger we start that with a younger generation, you know, we'll certainly have a positive impact, and it can help progress things and change things, not only within football, but in society as well. And I think that's something that's quite important. Sinead, a question I think for yourself then. So, you know, there will be lots of people who are part of clubs listening in tonight, and possibly parents or even friends of others. You know, if somebody did approach you and opened up to you, how would you support somebody then who might be questioning their sexuality or their gender identity, and maybe even considering coming out within the football environment? You know, how can you support them in those circumstances?
I think the best support you can give to anyone is to listen without judgment and to make them feel accepted in what they're saying for them as a person, and to let them know when they're ready to come out that you will be there with them and you will support them all the way. And as a safeguarding officer, I would signpost to like Mermaid, somewhere like that, if they wanted more of a deeper advice. But on a one-to-one level, I'll just let them know that I was there for them, that we would, when they're ready, we'll do it together, so they have my full support and listening. I think the biggest thing is to listen.
Fantastic, guys, brilliant. So we've got a number of questions that have been submitted in, which is great. So the first one is, I think Lou, maybe you might be best to answer this one for your experiences. But are the younger generation a lot more accepting of the LGBT community now? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but is that a trend that we're finding?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I've said, really, you know, we are seeing, you know, the poll I heard about today was in the United States, but YouGov did a poll recently that showed similar kind of things amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. that actually young people are much less likely. I mean, it's quite interesting really, because young people are much less likely to identify as gay, for example, but also less likely to identify as heterosexual, and more likely to identify as something in between those two places. So you know, that's happening. I think the majority of young people have diverse groups of friends now, but I think that, you know, Sophie said something earlier on about, you know, football reflects society, and I think that that's true up to a point. And then I also think that in some kind of like, you know, very gendered environments, that sport, and in this case football, can actually magnify society. You know, so in football we tend to have a kind of, you know, there's been traditionally a very kind of like particular masculinity that you're allowed to express in football, and I think, you know, when I go, you know, in my exposure to football, I mean, I'm no longer coaching, so maybe I'm a bit out of touch. But, you know, it was only about a few years ago, I was standing on the sidelines of a women's game, a grassroots women's game, and I heard two young women talking about one of the opposition players who had short hair, and they were just calling her a man for the whole of the game, you know, because she didn't have a big ponytail like everybody else on the pitch, you know. And I was like, what, in 2018 you're questioning somebody's gender because they've got short hair or they're presenting in a bit of a different way for other people. So I do think yes, society's changing, but you know, we have to be a little bit careful. We have to be a little bit careful in football, because we, you know, if we don't tackle it, then we will maintain these very kind of, you know, very strong gender norms, and we need to unpick those a bit, quite frankly. You don't have to be a certain type of bloke to play football. You don't have to be a certain type of woman to play football. You know, the game should be.
Brilliant. So the next question is, what would be the 2 or 3 key things you would recommend them to do in terms of clubs to start on the journey and be more openly inclusive? Sinead, what's your thoughts maybe? So in terms of clubs then, what are the 2 or 3 key things to maybe to start off that journey from being more openly inclusive?
For me, I'd say look at your policy like Lou said, and put a really good, strong policy in place for inclusion, and for how you would tackle discrimination and language, and have a strong policy, but make sure it's not a tick list. It needs to be a meaningful policy that's is the guidance, but it also brings meaningful change. And I also think don't be worried about starting, because I know it seems like a big thing to take on, and it is, and it's an important thing, but also you can have a lot of fun doing it. We found that everything that we've done with our players in terms of education, it's been immensely fun for them, for all the activities that we put on. So don't be worried about starting it. And I've always, the other thing is, if you're not sure about what to do, or if you need a bit of advice, that you could like come to us, go to any club that you think's doing inclusion well, come to Jason or to Lou, and anyone that's involved in inclusion, I found, is extremely helpful, and they're happy to help.
Yeah, and I think the point of tonight is launching our LGBTQ network Cymru for football. So you know, everyone that's attended tonight, you know, will be invited to the first meeting in the coming weeks, and that's the idea of it, isn't it, Sinead? Is that bringing people together that either have already been doing a lot of work at their club or at the start of their journey, so that we can share those stories, what works, the challenges that you had, for example, at your club with other clubs, and support them moving forward with that. I mean, that's something that we're looking to introduce and bring in, and what tonight's launch is all about. Because I think that's something that is important, to try and provide that support to others as well. Yes, Lou.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, something that Sophie raised earlier on, I think is really important, is around leadership. And so, Sophie was talking about Eddie Howe. Well, we're all probably not talking about Eddie Howe here, are we? Because we're probably mainly grassroots clubs on this call, I'm imagining. But I think that leadership is really important, because I know from listening to Sophie's story before that, once Eddie showed leadership, then kind of other people slightly fell in line with that. So I think one of the things for clubs is to make sure that the people who lead or govern your club, so whether you've got a committee, I'm guessing, you've got a committee or a board that governs your club, that they are on board. Because if they're not on board, then it won't be cascaded properly and it won't be dealt with holistically. So I think that that leadership's really important. If your board or committee, if you're one person in your club thinking, we really want to do this good work, but my committee aren't sort of very on board with it or don't know what they're doing, then try and find out ways of educating them, try and get onto workshops or get access to a bit of online learning, or maybe have get Jason to come and have a chat to your club or whatever, because once everybody's on board with it, then it'll make your job so much easier, and also you get to spread the load a bit, don't you? So
yeah, and it kind of leads us in nice to our next question, actually, Lewis, because you've kind of spoken about the top end of clubs, so making sure people in leadership positions, people who are sort of running the club, irrespective of whether they're paid or volunteers, of course. But also then in terms of the next question is kind of, should grassroots clubs have their own LGBTQ plus ambassadors, stroke role models, for example, a ladies player to be representative to younger players, feel like they can talk to somebody. Sophie, I don't know what your thoughts on that. Should every club have an ambassador or somebody that is as a person, a designated person that somebody could go to share any concerns or anything with them, maybe, and get some advice?
Well, I think that basically role models are so important to all of us, especially or thinking of coming out. And also for people that want to be allies, it's important that allies have a source of information, someone that they can sound stuff out with, informally or formally. I don't know whether it needs to be a formal role. I mean, if your club structure and more to the point, you have people that are willing to do it, willing to put their hands up and go, yeah, I will be an ambassador for this within my club, then brilliant. You're not going to lose anything by doing it. But if you aren't able to do it in a formal way, then there's still ways that you can do it informally. And the last thing that we want is for people to be put up on a not so much a pedestal, but like someone. If you want to know about LGBT stuff, go talk to the gay person over there. It's like, that's not what we want. Yeah, they're the one that does all the gay stuff. I mean, they might be, but that's for them. That's private stuff. Anyway, but I think that it's important that sort of it needs to be something that feels organic and natural to your club and the people within it. As we've had the examples where there might just be one person within a club that sees the need for this. And let's face it, we all know people within the game that are very resistant to change, and that they exist at pretty much every club you'll ever go to. There will be at least one person But it's important that we take everyone along with us on this journey. We can't force it down people's throats. We can't dictate that this is the way people have to do it. For me, real change only ever comes when it's organic and natural, and peer pressure. I mean, I'm involved with a football club here in England, Whitehawk Football Club in Brighton, and the fans sing homophobia no, racism no, sexism no, and it's peer pressure on the terrace that actually dictates the whole direction of the club, and that's an example of that equality and diversity leadership coming from the ground up, because it was on the terraces before it existed in the boardroom, and I think that's another conversation that we can be having.
Yeah, and you're right. And as you said, you know, anybody can be a role model, and it's not just those who do identify as part of the LGBT community to take the lead on moving this area forward. We need allies, we need male players, we need female players, we need anybody along that spectrum to be a voice, and everybody, this is something that is everybody's responsibility, and everybody can play a part of, and you know, that hold together stronger that we talk about as a football association, you know, and the national teams, I think is massively important here, that, you know, really we are together stronger by working together to become more inclusive in the game, so that it can encourage more people to be a part of that in whatever role, and to be the best person that they can in whatever role that might be. We've got a question which is a bit of a tricky one, around religion. So kind of says that any advice on how someone might approach promoting LGBTQ inclusion, particularly when someone's religious beliefs can have such a strong influence on their thought process to this subject. Any thoughts that you guys can offer that? Lou, I don't know whether you want to go maybe.
Yeah, I think that you know, we in some environments we will focus on the kind of anti-bullying aspect of the work that we're doing. So, you know, so you can, for example, think that you know, I mean, if there's somebody who truly believes that being gay or being trans is wrong, and you know, and you can't negotiate with that in any way whatsoever, then that's really tricky. But for people who think that if you're talking about LGBTIQ plus inclusion, that basically what you're going to do is you're going to tell their child, or, you know, whoever the wrong information, then I think it's about talking about creating inclusive spaces. Is basically the underpinning of that is about tackling bullying and tackling negative behaviour. Those are the main things behind most of the work that we do, for example. So, you know, if I have, you know, young people who say, well, you know, whoever my religious leader says that's wrong, you know, we would say, well, we're not asking you to be gay, and we're not asking you to be trans. We're asking you to treat people with respect and create an environment where everybody feels welcome. So, you know, so that's where I would be starting. I would be starting to talk about creating an environment which is anti-bullying, anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia. And then once you kind of got that message across, then you can start building on it from.
Brilliant, thanks, Lou. So we had a couple of other sort of questions, more so around kind of where clubs can have further resources, further support, or even kind of workshops themselves. So we're due as an association to launch a brand new equality, diversity and inclusion strategy soon. Now, part of that is going to be a range of proactive educational sessions that we're going to be rolling out across Wales. So this is one of the first sessions to kind of open up these types of discussions and have more of these more often, I suppose. And somebody mentioned, I think, in the chat around having more of an interactive sort of session. So there will be workshops that we'll be doing as well, in addition to these type of panel discussions. So there will be a range of that, but also those listening in and forming part of that LGBTQ football network moving forward as well. you know, these types of suggestions or things that you guys want as representative of clubs will help us to ensure that we put those types of sessions on in the future, when we do them, what times, all those sort of things. You know, we want to involve you again in our journey of continuing to support you moving forward. Now, there are a range of resources that we're currently developing, and I know Football vs Homophobia got some great resources and also can provide that support as well. And we'll certainly be working with Lou and Football vs Homophobia moving forward with workshops in addition to the stuff that we will be doing. So again, please reach out for us if anyone wanted any advice or wanted to inquire about us coming in and doing a session. There's lots of opportunities really that will be coming out you know, over the season, you know, certainly once COVID eases and we get back to some normality as well, in addition to continuing to take advantage of these types of opportunities online as well. So we just come to an end. I just wanted to go around everyone and just kind of just your final sort of thoughts really for anyone listening in, some key points around the things that we've been talking about tonight. Some great advice for clubs. So starting off with Sinead, just a couple of words of final advice really.
I would just say that you need to just take the step and become inclusive, and there's lots of great resources around you to help you achieve that. And if whether you're a parent or a coach or a player and you think that this is for your club, then I'd encourage you to go and talk to someone at your club and to get the ball rolling.
Great. And Sophie?
I would say that it's important that we embed the philosophy of respect everyone right at the core, right in the DNA of all of our clubs, because we need to be inclusive of everyone, regardless of their sexuality, their gender identity, their gender, their race, their religion, disability, age. And the thing is, if we respect everyone and we include everyone in our journey, then we can truly succeed, because together anything is possible.
And Lou?
Yeah, just really echo those points. I think Sinead's absolutely spot on. Take one small step, do one thing. So that might be go and talk to other people at your club. That might be, you know, drop Sinead an email and ask for her advice, or drop us an email at Football vs Homophobia. You know, and find out more if you want to find out more, or just do some reading. You know, there's, I saw somebody else put in the chat as well about, you know, are there other campaigns apart from FvH and Rainbow Laces? You know, in October, there's the Fair Weeks of Action as well. So there's an opportunity to get involved in some stuff around October as well. So just think, you know, decide to do one thing, you know, and take that first step. And that might just be having a conversation with one other person. And then I think, you know, try and be a little bit strategic about it. So work out, you know, you're here, you want to get there. How am I going to get there? And just break it down into some steps, into some bite-sized chunks, so that you don't feel really overwhelmed by it. And as Sinead says, you can make it great fun.
Brilliant, thank you guys. Thank you ever so much to everyone that's tuned in and attended tonight, and also to our special guest Sinead, Dr. Sophie Cook, and Lou Englefield as well. So I've put my email address in the chat, guys, which is pawb@faw.co.uk. That's PAWB@faw.co.uk. So please reach out, please get in touch. We will be in touch with regards to the first session of the LGBTQ Football Cymru network. So we'll hope that you will all be part of that and work towards becoming more of an inclusive game in the future for the LGBTQ community. So thank you ever so much, guys, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.